What if I told you that one of the most contested cities in human history appears hundreds of times in one sacred text, but just once in another? How could such a dramatic disparity exist, and what does it tell us about these faiths? This video explores historical and religious facts from an educational perspective. While I've done extensive research, I encourage viewers to explore multiple sources and perspectives on this complex topic. This content is meant to inform, not to make judgments about any religious tradition. Welcome to Wisdom Files, where we explore the fascinating intersections of history, religion, and culture. If you're new here, consider hitting that subscribe button and turning on notifications so you don't miss our weekly deep dives into religious history. Today we're examining something that has always fascinated me, the stark contrast between how Jerusalem appears in two of the world's most influential religious texts. Jerusalem is mentioned a staggering 669 times in the Bible, yet appears just once in the Quran. This disparity isn't just a random trivia fact, it tells us something profound about how these faiths developed, what they prioritize, and how their sacred geographies differ. So grab a drink, get comfortable, and let's explore this fascinating aspect of religious history that often goes unnoticed. So what makes Jerusalem so central to the biblical narrative? To understand this, we need to go back to the earliest stories of the Israelites. Jerusalem first emerges in the Bible as Salem during the time of Abraham, but it's under King David that the city truly becomes significant. After capturing it from the Jebusites around 1000 BCE, David establishes Jerusalem as his capital. But the real transformation comes with Solomon, David's son, who builds the first temple. Suddenly, Jerusalem isn't just a political capital, it becomes the spiritual center of Israelite worship. The temple housed the Ark of the Covenant and was considered the dwelling place of God's presence on earth. This is why when you read through the Hebrew Bible, what Christians call the Old Testament, Jerusalem isn't just mentioned casually. It's woven into prophecies, lamentations, psalms, and historical narratives. The city becomes almost a character itself in the biblical story. Think about the emotional connection expressed in Psalm 137, "If I forget you, Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill." Or consider the prophetic vision in Isaiah of Jerusalem as the future center of world peace. These aren't just geographical references, they're expressions of deep spiritual and national identity. If you're finding this exploration valuable, take a second to hit the like button, it really helps the channel reach more history enthusiasts like yourself. When the first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BCE, it was traumatic precisely because Jerusalem had become so central to Jewish religious identity. The exile from Jerusalem became the defining crisis that shaped much of later biblical literature. The Second Temple period further cemented Jerusalem's centrality, and by the time of Jesus in the New Testament, Jerusalem has become the stage for Christianity's founding narrative. The Gospels describe Jesus teaching in the temple, being tried in Jerusalem, and crucified outside its walls. The early Christian community forms in Jerusalem after Pentecost. So when we count those 669 mentions, we're not just talking about geographic references. We're talking about a city that became the embodiment of God's promises, the focal point of worship, and the symbol of both destruction and restoration throughout biblical history. Now, let's shift to the Quran. The fact that Jerusalem appears only once in the text, and even then not by name, represents something significant about Islam's historical development and theological priorities. The verse in question is in Surah Al-Isra, 17:1, referring to the Masjid al-Aqsa or farthest mosque, which Islamic tradition identifies as Jerusalem. The verse describes Muhammad's night journey, glory be to him who took his servant by night from the sacred mosque to the farthest mosque, whose surroundings we have blessed, to show him some of our signs. This single reference has nevertheless been enormously influential in Islamic tradition, establishing Jerusalem as Islam's third holiest city after Mecca and Medina. But why isn't it mentioned more directly or frequently? First, we need to consider geography and historical context. The Quran emerged in the Arabian Peninsula, primarily in Mecca and Medina. These places naturally feature more prominently in the text because they were the immediate environment of the early Muslim community. Unlike the Bible, which developed over centuries among people who lived in and around Jerusalem, the Quran was revealed over just 23 years to a community hundreds of miles from Jerusalem. The immediate sacred geography of Islam centered on the Kaaba in Mecca. Second, the Quran isn't structured as a historical narrative in the way much of the Bible is. It doesn't tell the story of the Jewish people or trace a national history connected to specific places. Instead, it focuses more on theological principles, ethical teachings, and the relationship between God and humanity. Third, and this is crucial, Islam sees itself as continuing and correcting the traditions that came before it. While respecting Jerusalem's significance in Jewish and Christian traditions, Islam established its own sacred geography with Mecca at its center. Muslims initially prayed toward Jerusalem before the direction of prayer, Qibla, was changed to face the Kaaba in Mecca. So the Quran's single mention of Jerusalem doesn't indicate lack of importance so much as it reflects Islam's distinct origins and spiritual geography. If you're enjoying this deep dive into religious geography, remember to subscribe to Wisdom Files for more content that explores the fascinating world of religious history and comparative theology. What's fascinating is how Jerusalem's importance in Islam grew significantly in the post-Quranic period. After Muhammad's death, as Islam expanded beyond Arabia and encountered established Jewish and Christian communities, Jerusalem gained greater theological importance. The city became central to Islamic eschatology, traditions about the end times, and was incorporated into Hadith literature, sayings attributed to Muhammad. The Dome of the Rock in Al-Aqsa Mosque, built in the late 7th century, physically established Islam's presence in this shared sacred space. This evolution mirrors something we see in Christianity as well. Jerusalem becomes increasingly important in Christian tradition and pilgrimage, even though Jesus himself pointed toward a more universal worship not tied to specific locations. Remember his words to the Samaritan woman, "A time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. The true worshippers will worship in spirit and truth." What we're seeing here is how sacred geography often develops beyond original texts. The Bible's 669 mentions established Jerusalem's centrality early for Judaism, while Islam's tradition built upon the Quran's single reference to create a rich theological significance for the city. So what can we learn from this striking numerical disparity? First, it reminds us that religions don't develop in isolation. They emerge in specific historical contexts that shape their earliest priorities and concerns. Judaism developed with Jerusalem at its heart, Islam emerged with Mecca as its center, incorporating Jerusalem as it expanded and encountered other traditions. Second, it shows how sacred texts and later traditions sometimes follow different trajectories. The Quran mentions Jerusalem only once, yet Islamic tradition elevated the city's importance significantly. Similarly, the New Testament mentions Mecca not at all, yet it would become central to how Christians understood the geography of Islam. Third, it highlights how religions can share sacred spaces while understanding them differently. Jerusalem is holy to all three Abrahamic faiths, but each connects to it through different stories, rituals, and historical associations. For Jews, Jerusalem represents the ancient covenant, the site of the temples, and the focus of millennia of prayers for return. For Christians, it's where Jesus taught, died, and was resurrected, establishing a new covenant. For Muslims, it's connected to prophets including Muhammad's night journey and ascension to heaven. What fascinates me most about this topic is how powerfully sacred geography shapes religious identity. The way we understand physical space affects how we practice faith. For Judaism, Jerusalem's centrality in Scripture created a spiritual and national focal point that sustained Jewish identity through centuries of diaspora. The biblical mentions weren't just references, they created a spiritual homeland that existed even when the physical connection was lost. For Islam, the focus on Mecca established a distinct sacred center that unified believers across vast geographic distances. The single Quranic reference to Jerusalem allowed for recognition of its importance without displacing Mecca from its primary position. This difference helps explain why Jerusalem has historically played different roles in these traditions. In Judaism, it's the irreplaceable center. In Islam, it's extremely important but exists alongside other crucial sacred sites. Today, these ancient textual patterns still influence how people relate to Jerusalem. When modern Jews speak of Jerusalem, they often echo biblical language that sees the city as the heart of their tradition. When modern Muslims defend Jerusalem's Islamic character, they draw not primarily from the Quran but from the rich traditions that developed afterward. Understanding these different textual foundations doesn't solve contemporary conflicts, but it does help us comprehend why various communities feel such profound connections to the same spaces. So there we have it, 669 mentions versus 1. But as we've seen, simple numbers don't tell the whole story. The Bible's frequent references to Jerusalem reflect its development within a tradition centered on that city. The Quran's single reference reflects its emergence in a different geographic and historical context, with subsequent tradition expanding the city's significance. What both traditions share is a recognition that certain places can become saturated with spiritual meaning, that the divine can be encountered with special intensity in specific locations. Whether mentioned once or hundreds of times, Jerusalem stands as one of humanity's most profound examples of how ordinary space can be transformed into something sacred. If you found value in this exploration, please support Wisdom Files by liking, subscribing, and sharing this video with others who appreciate nuanced discussions about religious history. Your engagement helps us create more content that bridges understanding across traditions. And let me know in the comments, what other comparative religious topics would you like to see explored on this channel? Your suggestions help shape future episodes. Until next time, this is Wisdom Files, where we uncover the hidden patterns in humanity's search for meaning. Thanks for watching.